On my son's wedding day, his father-in-law cut my microphone in front of 500 guests. He laughed into his own mic and called me trash. My son's fiancée smirked and sipped her champagne. I watched my son shatter a glass on the floor and cancel the wedding right there. And that was when I decided it was time. Time to tell them that the poor gardener they mocked was actually the owner of the bank holding their mortgages. My name is Barnaby Joyner, and this is how I taught a room full of snobs that net worth and self-worth are two very different things. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever been underestimated. I pulled my 1998 Ford F-150 up to the gleaming portico of the Ritz-Carlton. The truck was covered in a layer of honest mud from the drive over, and the engine sputtered with a noise that sounded like a dying tractor. A young valet in a pristine white uniform rushed out, his hand raised in a stop motion. He looked at my truck with a mixture of confusion and disgust. "Sir, you cannot park here. Deliveries are around the back near the loading dock." I rolled down the manual window, the crank squeaking in protest. "I am not a delivery driver's son. I am a guest." The valet scoffed, looking at my faded flannel shirt and the worn elbows of my jacket. "This is a private event for the St. James family. We do not have guests who drive trucks like this. Please move along before I call security." I did not argue. I did not tell him that I could buy this hotel and turn it into a parking lot by tomorrow morning. I simply put the truck in gear, drove past him, and parked in a spot reserved for the general manager. I stepped out and smoothed down the front of my suit. It was a chiton suit hand-stitched in Italy 30 years ago. To the untrained eye, it looked old and threadbare because the fabric had softened with age. To a man of taste, it was a masterpiece. But there were no men of taste here today, only men of money. I walked toward the crystal doors. Before I could even touch the handle, the heavy glass swung open. Patricia St. James stood there, blocking my path like a gatekeeper to hell. She was wearing a dress that probably cost more than my truck, and her face was pulled so tight I worried she might not be able to blink. She looked me up and down, her lip curling in a sneer. "You must be joking." I stopped. "Hello, Patricia. I am here for Liam." She stepped forward, invading my personal space. "You are not coming in through the front door looking like that. You smell like fertilizer and old gasoline. The staff entrance is around the corner next to the dumpsters. Use it." I looked her in the eye. "I am the father of the groom, Patricia. I will enter through the front door." She let out a sharp, cruel laugh. "You are an embarrassment, Barnaby. Just try not to touch anything. The upholstery in the lobby is imported silk." As I walked past her, she reached into her clutch, pulled out a bottle of perfume, and sprayed the air where I had just walked. She did it openly, ensuring the doormen and the arriving guests saw her purifying the air of my presence. I kept walking, my head high. I had faced tougher things than a cloud of Chanel No. 5. The ballroom was a monument to excess. There were white roses everywhere, thousands of them, covering every surface. I did a quick calculation in my head. $50,000 in flowers alone. A champagne tower reached toward the ceiling. A string quartet played in the corner. It was beautiful and it was hollow. It was everything I had taught my son Liam not to value. Liam was a good man, a talented architect who designed sustainable housing. He was humble. I never understood how he ended up with Brittany St. James, a girl who lived her entire life for Instagram likes. I spotted Liam near the altar. He looked pale. His tuxedo was new, but he looked uncomfortable, as if he were wearing a costume. When he saw me, his face lit up with relief. "Dad, you made it." He came over and hugged me, ignoring the mud on my shoes. I hugged him back, feeling the tension in his shoulders. "Of course I made it, son. I would not miss this." Just then, Clifford St. James materialized. He was a large man with a red face and a suit that struggled to contain his midsection. He did not greet me. He simply pointed a fleshy finger at my chest. Barnaby, we need to make a small adjustment. I checked the seating chart earlier, Clifford. I am at table 1 with the family. Clifford smirked. Yes, about that. We had some last-minute VIPs arrive. Investors for my new Golden Tower project. Very important people. We needed the seats at the front. He gestured vaguely toward the back of the cavernous room. We moved you to table 42. It is better, really. You will be more comfortable there. I looked to where he was pointing. Table 42 was in the far back corner, right next to the swinging doors of the kitchen and the restrooms. It was the table where the photographers and the sound technicians were eating. He was putting the father of the groom at the vendor table. Liam started to protest. Clifford, you cannot do that. He is my dad. Clifford clapped a hand on Liam's shoulder, squeezing hard enough to hurt. Liam, do not make a scene. This is business. Your father does not fit in at the head table. Look at him. He looks like he just crawled out of a compost heap. Besides, Brittany agrees. Liam went silent. I saw the fight leave his eyes. He was beaten down by these people, and I had let it happen because I wanted him to fight his own battles. I put a hand on Liam's arm. It is fine, son. I can see just fine from the back. I walked to table 42 and sat down. The chair wobbled. The photographer next to me, a nice young woman, nodded sympathetically. Sorry, man. They treat us like furniture, too. I smiled at her. It is all right, miss. The view is better from back here. You can see all the strings on the puppets. The ceremony began. It was a spectacle, not a wedding. Brittany walked down the aisle in a dress that cost $20,000. She didn't look at Liam. She looked at the cameras. She looked at the guests, ensuring they were admiring her. When she reached the altar, she stood next to my son, but she didn't hold his hand. She adjusted her veil for the best lighting. After the vows, which were devoid of any real emotion, we moved to the reception. The speeches began. Clifford grabbed the microphone first. He spoke for 20 minutes. He spoke about his business. He spoke about how much the wedding cost. He spoke about the Golden Tower project. He did not mention Liam once. He barely mentioned his own daughter, except to say she looked expensive. Then it was the best man's turn. Then the maid of honor. Finally, the master of ceremonies announced that the floor was open. Liam stood up. He took the microphone. His hand was shaking. I would like to invite my father Barnaby to say a few words. The room went silent. A cold, awkward silence. Patricia St. James whispered loudly to the woman next to her. Oh God, here we go. Someone get a mop. Brittany grabbed Liam's arm. Her whisper was a hiss, but in the quiet room it carried like a scream. Liam, no. You promised. He is going to embarrass us. He looks like a homeless person. Sit down. Liam pulled his arm away. He looked at his new wife with a mixture of horror and realization. He is my father, Brittany. Dad, please come up. I stood up. The walk from table 42 to the stage was a long one. I could feel 500 pairs of eyes on my back. I could hear the snickers. I saw a man in a tuxedo cover his nose as I passed. I saw Patricia roll her eyes so hard I thought they would get stuck. I climbed the stairs to the stage. I took the microphone from my son. His eyes were wet. I patted his hand. Oh. I looked out at the sea of faces. I cleared my throat. Good evening, everyone. My name is Barnaby. I am a gardener. I have spent my life working with dirt. And let me tell you, dirt is honest. You plant a seed, you water it, you nurture it, and it grows. It does not lie to you. It does not pretend to be something it is not. I looked at Brittany. I looked at Clifford and Patricia. I raised the microphone again. I looked at my son, and I see a man who knows the value of honesty. A man who knows that love is not a transaction. Suddenly, a high-pitched screech tore through the room. Feedback. It was deafening. People covered their ears. The sound cut out completely. My microphone was dead. I tapped it. Nothing. I looked over at the sound booth. Clifford Street James was standing there, his hand on the shoulder of the sound technician. He made a cutting motion across his throat. He had cut my audio. Clifford grabbed a handheld microphone from the DJ booth and boomed over the speakers, his voice drowning out my silence. Sorry about that, folks. Technical difficulties. It seems our gardener friend does not know how to use modern technology. The crowd erupted in laughter. It was not polite laughter. It was cruel, mocking laughter. Clifford continued walking toward the center of the dance floor, basking in the attention. Let's be honest, we did everyone a favor. Nobody wants to hear farming tips at a black tie event, right? Let's raise a glass to the St. James family for our incredible generosity in hosting everyone tonight, including the charity cases. Brittany laughed the hardest. She threw her head back, her diamonds catching the light, and laughed at my humiliation. I stood on the stage holding the dead microphone. I did not move. I did not look down. I looked straight at my son. Liam was trembling. His face was bright red. He looked at his wife, laughing at his father. He looked at his father-in-law, mocking his heritage. He looked at me, standing there with dignity despite their cruelty. Liam picked up a full glass of red wine from the head table. He lifted it high. The room went quiet, expecting a toast. Liam smashed the glass onto the white marble dance floor. The sound of shattering glass was louder than the microphone feedback. Red wine splattered across the hem of Brittany's pristine white dress. She screamed. Liam walked up to me. He took the dead microphone from my hand and dropped it on the floor. It landed with a heavy thud. "Come on, Dad," Liam said, his voice loud and clear in the silent room. "We are leaving," Brittany shrieked. "Liam, what are you doing? You are ruining my wedding." "My parents paid $300,000 for this. If you walk out that door, you will pay back every cent. I will sue you. I will ruin your career." Liam turned to her. He looked at her with absolute clarity. "You can keep the money, Brittany. You can keep the dress. You can keep your parents. But you do not get to keep me. And you certainly do not get to disrespect my father." He took my arm. "Let's go get a burger, Dad. I'm starving." As we walked down the stairs from the stage, Clifford blocked our path. His face was purple with rage. "You walk out now, you little nobody, and you are finished in this town. I know your boss. I know everyone. You will never work as an architect again. You are trash just like your father." I stopped. I gently moved Liam aside. I stepped close to Clifford. I spoke softly, so only he and the front row could hear. "Clifford, you have made a lot of noise today, but tomorrow the silence is going to be very loud." We walked out. We left the flowers, the champagne, and the 500 stunned guests behind us. We walked out to my muddy Ford truck. Liam got in the passenger seat without hesitation. I drove us to a small diner on the outskirts of town. We ordered burgers and fries. Liam loosened his tie and took a deep breath. "I am sorry, Dad. I am so sorry I put you through that. I was blind." I took a bite of my burger. It tasted better than any steak at the Ritz. "You were in love, son. Love makes us blind sometimes. But you woke up, that is what matters." Liam put his head in his hands. "But what am I going to do?" Clifford wasn't lying. "He has pull. He can blacklist me. I have rent. I have student loans. They are going to sue me for the wedding costs. I am ruined." I wiped my mouth with a paper napkin. I reached into the inside pocket of my old jacket. I pulled out a phone. Not a smartphone. An old rugged brick of a phone that I used for secure lines. I dialed a number. I put it on speaker. A voice answered immediately. Crisp, professional, English accent. Good evening, Mr. Joyner. We were not expecting a call tonight. Is everything all right? I looked at Liam. His eyes widened. He had never heard that voice before. He had never heard anyone call me Mr. Joyner with that tone of deference. Blackwood, I need you to bring the Phoenix file to my location. I am at the diner on Route 9. There was a pause. The Phoenix file, sir, that contains the full asset breakdown of Joyner Holdings. Yes. And bring the acquisition papers for the Golden Tower project. Sir, the Golden Tower is a St. James property. It is highly leveraged. It is a risky asset. I know, Blackwood. Just bring the papers. And bring a suit, a real one. Tom Ford, navy blue. My measurements are on file. Understood, sir. I will be there in 20 minutes. I hung up. Liam was staring at me as if I had just grown a second head. Dad, who was that? What is Joyner Holdings? I sighed. I leaned back in the booth. The vinyl squeaked. Liam, there is something I haven't told you. I am not just a gardener. I retired 20 years ago. Before that, I founded an investment firm. Liam blinked. You have savings? I chuckled. You could say that, son. Do you remember when your mother died? When you were 12, he nodded slowly. She died in a robbery. It wasn't a robbery, Liam. It was a kidnapping. They took her because they knew who I was. They knew I had money. The ransom exchange went wrong. After she died, I sold the public face of the company. I went underground. I bought the farm. I raised you in that truck and in those muddy boots because I wanted you to be safe, and I wanted you to build a character that didn't depend on a credit card. Liam was silent for a long time. So, are we comfortable? I looked him in the eye. Son, Joyner Holdings owns the bank that Clifford Street James uses. We own the land his Golden Tower is built on. And as of tomorrow morning, I intend to call in his loans. Liam's jaw dropped. 20 minutes later, a black Rolls-Royce Phantom pulled into the parking lot of the diner next to my muddy Ford. It looked like a spaceship had landed. 4 men in dark suits got out. One of them carried a silver briefcase. Another carried a garment bag. Mr. Blackwood walked into the diner. He did not look at the grease stains on the tables. He walked straight to our booth. He bowed 45 degrees. Good evening, Mr. Joyner. I stood up. I took the garment bag. I walked to the diner restroom. I took off the old flannel shirt. I took off the worn pants. I put on the crisp white shirt, the silk tie, the navy blue Tom Ford suit that fit me like a second skin. I looked in the mirror. Barnaby the gardener was gone. Barney Joyner, the Wolf of Wall Street, was back. I walked out. Liam stood up. He looked at the car outside. He looked at me. Dad. Let's go, son. We have a lawsuit to prepare for. And I believe you need a job. How would you like to be the lead architect for the new Joyner Foundation? Liam smiled. A real smile. The next morning, the sun rose over a different world. Liam's phone began to ring at 7 a.m. It was his boss at the architecture firm. Liam, I am sorry, but Clifford Street James just called. He threatened to pull his contracts if we kept you. You are fired. Effective immediately. Liam looked at me across the breakfast table in my penthouse apartment. He put the phone down. I got fired. I sipped my coffee. Good. That saves us the trouble of resigning. An hour later, a process server knocked on the door. He handed Liam a thick envelope. It was a lawsuit from the St. James family. They were suing for $450,000. Breach of promise, emotional distress, and the cost of the wedding. Liam read the number and went pale. Dad, 450,000. I took the paper. I glanced at it. I handed it to Blackwood, who was standing by the window. Blackwood, handle this, and send the counteroffer to Clifford's bank. What counteroffer, sir? Tell them I am buying his debt. All of it. Blackwood smiled a shark-like smile. Very good, sir. And the St. James family. I stood up and walked to the window looking out over the city. Invite them to a meeting. Tell them the new owner of their debt is willing to negotiate. Tell them to come to the Joyner Tower at noon. They are going to think they are meeting a stranger, Liam said. Exactly. They think they are meeting a shark. They don't know they are meeting the gardener. At 11:55, the St. James family arrived at the lobby of the Joyner Tower. I watched them on the security monitors. Clifford looked arrogant. Patricia looked annoyed to be in an office building. Brittany was wearing huge sunglasses playing the victim. They bullied the receptionist. Do you know who we are? We are here to see the chairman. We don't wait. The receptionist simply pressed a button. Send them up. They rode the private elevator to the top floor. The doors opened. They walked into the boardroom. A massive table made of black walnut. Floor-to-ceiling windows. I was sitting in the chairman's chair, my back to the door, looking out at the skyline. Liam was standing next to me, looking sharp in a new suit. I heard the door close. Clifford's voice boomed. Finally. Listen, whoever you are, I am Clifford St. James. I don't know how you bought my debt notes, but I am prepared to offer you. He stopped. He saw Liam. You... What are you doing here? Did you follow us? Security? Get this trash out of here, Patricia screeched. This is stalking Brittany. Call the police. I slowly spun the chair around. Hello, Clifford. Hello, Patricia. Please take your shoes off. That is a $20,000 Persian rug, and I don't want your cheap souls ruining it. The silence was absolute. Clifford's eyes bulged. Patricia gasped. Brittany took off her sunglasses, her mouth hanging open. You, Clifford stammered. The gardener. I stood up. I buttoned my jacket. I am Barnaby Joyner, chairman of Joyner Holdings, and as of 10 minutes ago, I am the owner of the Golden Tower. I am the owner of your villa, and I am the owner of the loan on that Bentley you drove here. Clifford turned gray. Joyner. But that's a billion-dollar company. Yes. And you are 4 months behind on your payments, Clifford. I looked at the file on the table. You falsified your assets to get the loans. You used the wedding budget to pay interest on overdue loans. That is fraud, Clifford. I looked at Brittany. She was trembling. She looked at Liam. Liam, you... You knew, Liam shook his head. No, I didn't. But I know now. Brittany ran to him. She grabbed his hands. Liam, baby, listen. I didn't mean it yesterday. I was stressed. My parents made me do it. I love you. We can fix this. We can go on our honeymoon. Liam gently removed her hands. He stepped back. You don't love me, Brittany. You love the lifestyle you thought I couldn't give you. And now you love the lifestyle you think I can give you. But yesterday, you watched them treat my father like a dog, and you laughed. He looked at me. Dad, finish it. I picked up a red folder. Clifford, Patricia. You are bankrupt. I am calling in the loans immediately. My auditors are already at your offices. You have 24 hours to vacate your properties. Patricia screamed. You can't do this. We are the St. James family. Not anymore, I said coldly. Now you are just trespassers. Mr. Blackwood opened the door. Security will escort you out. As they were dragged out, screaming and crying threats, Clifford looked back at me one last time. Why, he asked. Why hide it? Because I wanted to know if you were worth the money, I replied. You weren't. When the door closed, silence returned to the office. Liam sat down in one of the leather chairs. He looked exhausted, but free. So, Dad, what now? I walked over and put a hand on his shoulder. Now, son, we go to work. You have a foundation to build. I have a company to run. And I think it is time we bought some new fishing rods. I hear the salmon are running. Liam smiled. Sounds perfect, Dad. But can we take the truck? I laughed. Always son, always the truck. That day I learned that the best revenge is not just success. The best revenge is revealing that the power they thought they held over you never existed at all. They mocked a poor old man, but they were destroyed by a billionaire father who loved his son enough to let him see the truth. Never judge a book by its cover, and never judge a man by his mud. You never know who holds the deed to your future. The laughter in the ballroom was not just a sound, it was a physical force pressing against my chest. 500 people, the elite of the city, were cackling at Clifford's cruel joke. He stood there, center stage, basking in the adulation, a red-faced king of a rotten kingdom, holding the only working microphone. I stood a few feet away, holding the dead device, my knuckles turning white, not from shame but from the effort of restraining myself. I could have bought this hotel, I could have bought every car in the valet lot, and I could have bought Clifford Street. James 10 times over, but in that moment, I was just the old gardener in a 30-year-old suit being mocked by a man whose net worth was entirely built on credit. I looked down at table 42, where the photographers were awkwardly staring at their plates, trying not to witness my humiliation. I looked at the head table. Patricia St. James was dabbing tears of laughter from her eyes, her expensive mascara running slightly. And then I looked at my son. Liam. He was sitting next to Brittany, frozen. His face was pale, drained of all blood. He looked at his new wife, the woman he had pledged his life to just an hour ago. She was laughing. She was looking at her father and laughing, clapping her hands, her diamond bracelets jingling. She did not look at Liam. She did not see the devastation in his eyes. She only saw the spectacle. In that second, something in my son broke. And something else was born. He stood up. The movement was so abrupt that his chair scraped loudly against the marble floor, cutting through the laughter like a knife. The sound startled Brittany. She stopped laughing and looked at him confused. Liam, where are you going? She hissed, her voice low and sharp. Sit down. You are making a scene. Liam did not answer her. He did not even look at her. He stepped away from the table, his movements stiff and mechanical, as if he were moving through water. He walked toward the stage. The crowd, sensing a shift in the atmosphere, began to quiet down. The laughter died away, replaced by a heavy, expectant silence. Clifford, seeing Liam approach, beamed, thinking his son-in-law was coming to join in the fun. Come on up, Liam, Clifford boomed into the mic, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. Tell them about the time your dad tried to fix your bicycle with duct tape. Liam climbed the stairs. He walked straight up to Clifford. He did not smile. He did not blink. He reached out and ripped the microphone from Clifford's hand. It wasn't a gentle exchange. It was a seizure of power. The feedback squealed again, a sharp pierce of sound that made everyone flinch, but Liam didn't flinch. He gripped the microphone so hard I thought the plastic might crack. He turned to face the crowd. He looked at the sea of faces, the politicians, the business moguls, the socialites who had just spent the last minute laughing at his father. His voice, when it came, was not the voice of the gentle architect I had raised. It was the voice of a man who had burned his bridges and was standing in the ash. You think this is funny? Liam asked. His voice was low, shaking with a suppressed rage that was terrifying to behold. You think it is hilarious to mock a man who has worked with his hands every day of his life to put food on my table? He turned and pointed at me. I stood there silent, watching him. My heart was hammering against my ribs. This was the test. This was the moment I had waited 32 years for. That man, Liam, continued, his voice rising, is the only reason I am standing here. He taught me how to read. He taught me how to draw. He taught me that integrity is worth more than a corner office. He wore the same boots for 10 years, so I could have new textbooks. He drove a truck that barely ran, so I could go to college. Liam turned back to Clifford, who was looking at him with a mixture of confusion and annoyance, like a man watching a dog that refused to perform a trick. "You call him trash," Clifford, Liam said, stepping into the older man's personal space. "You call him a charity case. Well, let me tell you something. If he is trash, then I am trash. Because everything I am, every single good part of me, comes from him. And everything you are, Clifford, is just noise. Expensive, loud, empty noise." A gasp rippled through the room. Patricia St. James stood up at the head table, knocking over a crystal flute. "Liam," she shrieked. "How dare you speak to him like that?" Liam ignored her. He turned his gaze to Brittany. She was staring at him, mouth open, her eyes wide with shock. "And you," Liam said, his voice breaking slightly. You sat there and you laughed. You watched them humiliate my father, and you laughed." Liam, Brittany stammered, standing up, her dress rustling. "Liam, baby, stop. You are tired. You are stressed. Just sit down." "No," Liam said. "No, I am not tired. I am finally awake." He reached up and undid his bow tie, letting it hang loose around his neck. He looked at the 500 guests one last time. "I apologize for the inconvenience, but there will be no reception. There will be no cake cutting. There will be no first dance. Because there is no marriage." The silence was absolute. It was a vacuum that sucked the air out of the room. "I am calling it off," Liam said. "I cannot marry into a family that has no honor. I cannot marry a woman who has no heart." He dropped the microphone. It hit the stage floor with a heavy thud that sounded like a gavel striking a verdict. Brittany screamed. It wasn't a scream of heartbreak. It was a scream of fury. She ran toward the stage, her face twisted into a mask of pure ugliness. "Are you insane?" she shrieked, her voice clawing at the air. "You cannot do this. Do you know how much this cost? My parents spent $300,000 on this wedding. $300,000. Liam, the flowers alone cost more than your father makes in a decade." She stomped up the stairs, grabbing Liam's lapels, shaking him. "If you walk out that door, you are finished. You hear me? We will sue you for every penny. You will be paying this back for the rest of your miserable life. And my father will destroy you. He knows everyone in this city. He will make sure you never work as an architect again. You will be begging on the street with your loser father." Clifford stepped forward, his face purple veins bulging in his neck. "You listen to her, boy. You walk away now, and I will bury you. I will sue you for breach of contract, for emotional distress. For the damn shrimp cocktails, I will ruin you." I watched my son. I stood there, my hands by my sides, and I waited. I could have stepped in. I could have pulled out my phone and ended Clifford right then and there. I could have told them that I could buy their debt and evict them before sunset. But I didn't, because a father cannot fight his son's battles forever. A man must choose his own path. Liam looked at Brittany, who was still screaming about the money. He looked at Clifford, who was threatening his future. Then he looked at me. His eyes were clear. The fear was gone. The hesitation was gone. He gently removed Brittany's hands from his suit jacket. He pushed her away, not violently, but with a firmness that said she was no longer relevant to his life. "Do it," Liam said calmly. "Sue me. Ruin me. Blacklist me. I don't care." He stepped down from the stage. He walked past Clifford, who was sputtering with impotent rage. He walked past Patricia, who was fanning herself frantically. He walked straight to me. He looked at my old suit. He looked at my muddy shoes. He smiled a sad, tired smile that reached his eyes. Let's go, Dad, Liam said. He put his hand on my shoulder. It was a heavy, grounding weight. I'm sorry about the dinner, Dad. I know you didn't get to eat. Let's get out of here. I'm buying you a burger. I looked at him, and my heart swelled with a pride so fierce it almost brought me to my knees. He had lost everything. He had lost his wife, his job, his reputation, and his financial future. And he had done it all for me. He had chosen the gardener over the gold. I put my hand over his. That sounds perfect, son. I know a place. We turned our backs on the screaming bride and the raging father-in-law. We walked down the long aisle between the tables. The guests parted for us, staring in disbelief. We walked out of the ballroom, out of the crystal doors, and into the cool evening air. Behind us, the chaos was just beginning. But ahead of us, the parking lot was quiet. My old truck sat there waiting. Liam took a deep breath of the outside air. It smells like rain, he said. It smells like freedom, I replied. We got into the truck. As I turned the key and the engine sputtered to life, I looked at my son one more time. He was staring out the window, watching the lights of the hotel fade away. He didn't know it yet, but he had just passed the only test that mattered. He thought he was driving away to a life of debt and struggle. He had no idea that he was sitting next to a billionaire. He had no idea that the man he had just defended was about to hand him the world. "Buckle up, son," I said, shifting the truck into gear. "The night is young, and we have a lot to talk about." The sun that rose the next morning did not bring hope, it brought a reckoning. I had slept on the lumpy couch in Liam's studio apartment, a space so small that the kitchen sink was within arm's reach of the bed. It was a stark contrast to the penthouse I had left empty across town, and an even starker contrast to the gilded cage Liam had almost married into. I watched my son sleep for a moment, his face troubled even in rest. He had done the brave thing, the honorable thing, but honor does not pay the rent. And Clifford Street James was about to remind him of that. At 7 o'clock sharp, Liam's phone began to scream on the coffee table. It wasn't a normal ringtone, it sounded like a siren. Liam jolted awake, his eyes wide and red-rimmed. He fumbled for the device, clearing his throat to sound professional. "Hello, this is Liam." I sat up, folding the thin blanket I had used. I watched his face. I saw the color drain out of it until he looked like a ghost. "I understand," Liam said, his voice barely a whisper. "But Mr. Galloway, my performance reviews have been perfect. I brought in the Riverside project. This has nothing to do with my work." There was a pause. A loud, angry voice crackled on the other end of the line. "Yes, sir. I understand. Effective immediately." Liam lowered the phone. He stared at the blank screen for a long time before looking up at me. "I am fired, Dad." I nodded, slowly pouring 2 cups of instant coffee. "I expected that, son. Clifford moves fast. It is worse than that." Liam said, his voice trembling. "Mr. Galloway said that Clifford St. James called him personally at 6 a.m. He threatened to pull the financing for the firm's 3 biggest projects if I was still on the payroll by breakfast. And he told Galloway that if he gave me a reference, he would destroy the firm. I am not just fired, Dad. I am blacklisted. No architecture firm in this city will touch me." He sank onto the edge of his bed, burying his hands in his hair. "I studied architecture for 6 years. I worked 80-hour weeks. And it is gone. All of it. Just like that." I walked over and placed the cup of coffee in front of him. It was a cheap ceramic mug chipped at the rim. "He is trying to scare you, Liam. He is a bully. And bullies always try to hit you where it hurts the most before you can hit back." Liam looked at me with a mixture of love and hopelessness. "He isn't trying, Dad. He is succeeding. How am I going to pay rent? How am I going to pay my student loans? I have $300 in my checking account." Brittany liked expensive dinners. Before I could answer, before I could tell him that he didn't need to worry about money ever again, A heavy fist pounded on the door. It wasn't a friendly knock. It was the rhythmic, authoritative pound of someone who is paid to ruin your day. Liam jumped. "Who is that?" I had a feeling I knew. "Answer it, son. Face it." Liam walked to the door and opened it. A man stood there in a cheap windbreaker holding a thick manila envelope. He looked bored. "Liam Joyner," the man asked. "Yes. You have been served." The man thrust the envelope into Liam's chest, turned on his heel, and walked away down the hallway without looking back. Liam closed the door. His hands were shaking so badly, he almost dropped the package. He tore it open. A stack of legal documents slid out onto the small dining table. I watched him read. I watched his eyes scan the lines of legalese. I watched the moment the reality of his situation crushed the air out of his lungs. "Oh my God," Liam whispered. "What is it, son?" I asked, though I already knew the St. James playbook. "They are suing me, Dad. Breach of promise, emotional distress, loss of reputation, and..." He flipped the page, his finger trembling on the paper. "And restitution for expenses incurred. They want me to pay for the wedding." He looked up at me, his eyes wide with terror. $450,000. The number hung in the stagnant air of the apartment like a guillotine blade. "They are charging me for the flowers." Liam listed, his voice rising in panic. $50,000 for roses, $30,000 for the catering. They are charging me for Brittany's therapy sessions for the next 5 years. They are even charging me for the non-refundable deposit on the honeymoon suite in Bora Bora. $450,000, Dad. I will be in debt for the rest of my life. I will never own a home. I will never retire. I am 32 years old and my life is over. He began to pace the tiny room, his steps frantic. He picked up the lawsuit and threw it down again. "This is Clifford. This is his way of killing me without pulling a trigger. He wants to make me a slave to this debt. He wants to watch me crawl." He stopped pacing and looked at me. His face crumpled. The anger drained away, leaving only a profound, devastating guilt. "I am so sorry, Dad." I frowned. "Sorry? What are you sorry for, son? For dragging you into this," Liam said, tears finally spilling over. "You were happy on the farm. You were safe. I brought you into their world. I let them mock you, and now you have to watch me drown. I should have just sat there. I should have let them laugh. I should have let Clifford cut your mic. I should have swallowed my pride." "No, son," I said firmly, standing up. "Never." Liam shook his head, wiping his eyes aggressively. "You don't understand the math, Dad. I make $60,000 a year before taxes. Even if I got a job tomorrow, which I won't because I am blacklisted, it would take me 20 years just to pay off the principal. With interest, I will die with this debt." He looked around the shabby apartment, as if searching for a solution in the peeling paint. "I will sell the car. That gets me $5,000. I can sell my drafting equipment. Maybe $2,000. He looked at me with a desperate, wild intensity. "I will sell a kidney, Dad. I am serious. People do it. I have 2 healthy kidneys. That could cover the legal fees at least. I will do whatever it takes. I will work 3 jobs. I will scrub floors. But I promise you I will not let them win. I will not let them break me." I looked at my son. He was terrified. He was ruined. He was facing a mountain of debt that would crush a lesser man. And yet his first instinct was not to run away, but to figure out how to fight. He was willing to sell parts of his own body to pay a debt he didn't morally owe, just to keep his dignity. He was a warrior. And he was worthy. I walked over to the window. Down on the street, I could see normal life going on. People walking dogs, delivery trucks driving by. They had no idea that in this room a good man was being dismantled by a rich monster. "You are not selling a kidney, Liam," I said, my voice low and calm. and you are not scrubbing floors." Liam laughed a dry, mirthless sound. "I don't think I have a choice, Dad, unless you have $500,000 buried in your garden next to the tomatoes." I turned from the window. I looked at him. The time for the lesson was over. The time for the revelation had arrived. "Actually, son," I said, reaching into my pocket and pulling out my old brick phone, "I don't bury money, I invest it." I dialed the number. "Liam, what do you know about Joyner Holdings?" Liam looked confused, wiping his nose with his sleeve. "Joyner Holdings, the investment firm. They own half the city. They built the stadium." Why I watched his face closely. I wanted to remember this moment forever. Because Clifford Street James leveraged his entire business to build that golden tower. He borrowed $50 million to do it. And last week, the bank that holds that loan was acquired. Liam stared at me. "Okay. What does that have to do with us?" I smiled. A cold, sharp smile that Barnaby the gardener never wore. The bank was acquired by Joyner Holdings Liam. And the chairman of Joyner Holdings is a man who takes family loyalty very seriously. I pressed the call button. "Blackwood, bring the car around. And bring the papers. We have a debt to collect." Liam stood up slowly. "Dad." "Why are you talking like that? Who is Blackwood?" I walked over to the garment bag I had brought in from the truck the night before. I unzipped it, revealing the navy blue Tom Ford suit. "I am not just your father, Liam. I am the man who owns Clifford's mortgage. And today we are going to foreclose. Put on your best shirt, son. We have a meeting to attend." The silence in the studio apartment was thick enough to choke on. The lawsuit from the St. James family lay on the scratched laminate table like a dead animal, the sum of $450,000 staring up at us in bold black ink. Liam was slumped in the only chair, his head in his hands, his breathing ragged. He looked like a man who had just watched his entire future burn down and was now sifting through the ashes for a reason to keep going. He was vibrating with a terrifying mix of shame and panic, the kind that makes good men do desperate things. I sat on the edge of his bed, the springs groaning under my weight. I looked at that piece of paper. To Clifford Street, James, that lawsuit was a weapon, a way to crush a young architect who dared to have a spine. To me, it was something else entirely. It was permission. I reached into the pocket of my worn canvas jacket and pulled out the phone. It was a satellite phone encased in black rubber, heavy as a brick and ugly as sin. Liam looked up, his eyes red-rimmed and confused. He had seen that phone 1,000 times. He thought it was just an old relic I was too stubborn to upgrade. He didn't know it was encrypted with military-grade security. I punched in a sequence of numbers that I hadn't used in 20 years. My thumb hovered over the call button. I looked at my son. "Liam," I said, my voice cutting through the stale air of the apartment. "Do not sell your car. Do not sell your drafting table. And for God's sake, keep your kidneys." I pressed send. The line clicked open instantly. No ringing, just a sharp intake of breath on the other end. "Blackwood," I said. "We are at condition 0. Bring the Phoenix file to my son's address." There was a pause, a hesitation that spoke volumes. "The Phoenix file, sir." That protocol initiates the total liquidity of the reserve assets. It unmasks the primary shareholder. "Are you certain?" I looked at the lawsuit on the table. I looked at the despair in my son's eyes. I have never been more certain of anything in my life. "Bring the car, and Blackwood bring the suit. The blue one. We are going to war." I ended the call and set the heavy phone on the table right on top of the lawsuit. The plastic thud sounded like a gavel. Liam was staring at me. His confusion had morphed into a strange, fearful awe. "Dad," he whispered, "who is Blackwood? What is the Phoenix file? You're scaring me. You sound different." I stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the grimy alleyway below. I sound different because I have been playing a character for 32 years, son. Barnaby the gardener. Barnaby the man who fixes his truck with duct tape. Barnaby who counts coupons at the grocery store. I turned back to him. That man is real. I lived him. But he is not all I am. I took a deep breath. The truth was a heavy weight, and releasing it felt dangerous. Sit down, Liam. We have 20 minutes before Blackwood gets here. You need to know why your life has been the way it has. Liam sat. He looked like a child again, waiting for a bedtime story, only this story was a ghost story. You know your mother died when you were young, I began. You know I told you it was a robbery gone wrong, a random act of violence in the city. Liam nodded slowly. You said she was in the wrong place at the wrong time. I lied, I said flatly. She was exactly where they wanted her to be. Your mother wasn't killed for her purse, Liam. She was taken because my name was on the cover of Forbes magazine. Liam's mouth fell open. Forbes. I was the founder of Joyner Holdings. I made my first billion in tech infrastructure before you were born. We were loud about it. We had the cars, the houses, the security details. We thought money was a shield. I walked over to the kitchenette and poured a glass of tap water. My hands were steady, but my heart was racing. It wasn't a shield. It was a target. They took her from a charity gala. The security I paid millions for was compromised. They didn't want the ransom, Liam. They wanted to send a message to the establishment. By the time I found her, I stopped. The memory was a black hole I usually skirted around, but today I had to dive in. It was too late. Money couldn't buy her back. Power couldn't save her. All my billions were just paper when it mattered most. Liam was crying now, silent tears tracking through the grime on his face. Dad, why didn't you tell me? Because I looked at you. I said, my voice fierce. You were a baby. You were the only thing I had left. And I realized that as long as I was Barnaby Joyner, the billionaire, you were a target. You would never be safe. You would never be loved for who you were, only for what you could give. You would end up like Clifford Street James Hollow, eaten alive by greed, surrounded by sharks. I walked over and knelt in front of him, taking his rough, calloused hands in mine. So I killed Barnaby Joyner. I sold the public face of the company. I put the assets into a blind trust managed by Blackwood. I bought the farm in the middle of nowhere. I bought the truck. I put dirt under my fingernails, and I vowed that you would grow up knowing the value of $1, not just the price of it. I squeezed his hands. I wanted you to struggle, Liam. I wanted you to work double shifts. I wanted you to know what it feels like to earn your place in the world, because that is the only way to build a soul that cannot be bought. Liam pulled his hands away, looking at them as if they belonged to a stranger. So it was all a test, my student loans, the nights I ate ramen because I couldn't afford meat. You watched me struggle when you could have fixed it with a phone call. It wasn't a test, I said softly. It was an education. And yesterday, when you stood up to that man, when you threw away a fortune to defend my honor, you graduated. I stood up and paced the small room. The energy was shifting. The despair was evaporating, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. You asked if I had money buried in the garden. I don't. But Joyner Holdings has spent the last 20 years quietly acquiring the debt of men like Clifford St. James, men who leverage their souls for status. I own the bank that holds the mortgage on his golden tower. I own the note on his yacht. I own the paper on that ridiculous venue where he humiliated us. I picked up the lawsuit from the table and held it up. He thinks he can crush you with this. He thinks $450,000 is a weapon. I ripped the paper in half. Then I ripped it again. This is confetti, Liam. This is nothing. Clifford Street, James is playing poker with a man who owns the casino, and he just went all in against the house. A low rumble vibrated through the floorboards. It wasn't the traffic. It was the deep, powerful purr of an engine that cost more than this entire apartment building. I went to the window. Down below, double-parked next to a dumpster, was a Rolls-Royce Phantom, sleek and black as a shark. 4 men in dark suits were stepping out, scanning the street with professional paranoia. I turned to my son. "That is Mr. Blackwood. He has the Phoenix file. It contains the deeds to everything Clifford thinks he owns." Liam stood up. He looked at the torn lawsuit on the floor. He looked at me. The shock was fading, replaced by the same steel I had seen in his eyes at the wedding. "You hid for 20 years, he said. I nodded. "To keep you safe." And now I smiled. "Now the hiding is over. You are safe. You are strong. And it is time to remind the world that the Joyner name still has teeth." There was a knock at the door. Precise. 3 sharp raps. I opened it. Mr. Blackwood stood there holding a garment bag like it was the crown jewels. He looked at the peeling paint on the doorframe, then at me. "Your suit, sir," he said, "and the acquisition papers." I took the bag. I looked back at Liam. "Get dressed, son. We have a debt to collect. And I don't think Clifford likes surprises." The sound of the engine outside was not a noise, it was a vibration, a low-frequency hum that rattled the loose window pane in its frame. I walked to the glass and looked down. In a neighborhood where the most common vehicle was a rusted sedan with a missing muffler, a Phantom had arrived. The black Rolls-Royce shone under the streetlights, like a dark jewel dropped into the gutter. It was comically out of place. A spaceship landed in a cornfield. It took up 2 spaces, double-parked with an arrogance that said parking tickets were just the cost of doing business. 4 men stepped out of the vehicle in unison. They moved with the synchronized precision of a hit squad. They wore earpieces and suits that cost more than the annual rent of this entire building. They scanned the street, their eyes moving over the overflowing dumpsters and the cracked pavement without judgment, only assessing threats. One of them stayed by the car, his hand resting casually near his waist. The other 3 moved toward the building entrance. In the middle of the formation walked a man carrying a silver aluminum briefcase handcuffed to his wrist. Liam joined me at the window. He looked down and his breath hitched in his throat. "Dad, who are those people? Is that for us? Are we in trouble?" He sounded young again, terrified of the monsters under the bed. "We are not in trouble, son," I said, turning away from the window. "We are the trouble." The footsteps in the hallway were heavy and deliberate. I could hear doors opening down the hall, neighbors peeking out to see who had invaded their sanctuary of struggle. Then the silence as they quickly closed their doors, realizing this was not a visit from a landlord or a pizza delivery. This was power knocking. 3 sharp raps on the door. I did not hesitate. I opened it. The hallway was narrow and smelled of old cooking oil and damp carpet. But standing there, filling the space with an air of absolute authority, was Arthur Blackwood. He was older now, his hair silver at the temples, but his posture was as rigid as a steel beam. He ignored the peeling paint. He ignored the flickering fluorescent light that buzzed overhead. He looked only at me. He did not smile. He did not extend a hand for a shake. He did not say, "Hello, old friend." He stepped back, creating a space of reverence in that cramped hallway. He bowed. It was not a nod. It was a formal 45-degree bow, a gesture of submission and supreme respect that belonged in a boardroom in Tokyo or a palace in London, not in a walk-up studio in the Rust Belt. "Mr. Chairman," he said, his voice crisp and clear, cutting through the stagnant air. "The board awaits your command. We are operational." Liam let out a small, strangled sound. He was backed up against the kitchenette counter, clutching his coffee mug like a shield. He looked from Blackwood to me, his eyes wide, darting back and forth, trying to reconcile the image of his father, The gardener, with the man being treated like royalty. I nodded to Blackwood. At ease, Arthur. Come in. Blackwood signaled to the bodyguards. Two took up positions on either side of the door facing outward. The third, the one with the briefcase, entered the apartment and set the case on the small wobbly table. He unlocked the handcuff from his wrist with a click that sounded like a gunshot. He bowed to me and retreated to the hallway, closing the door behind him. Blackwood was holding the garment bag. He looked around the room. His eyes landed on the unmade bed, the stack of unpaid bills, the half-eaten toast. His expression did not flicker. He turned to me. I took the liberty of bringing the Tom Ford Navy pinstripes, sir, and the Patek Philippe. I assumed you would want to be fully prepared for the acquisition. I took the bag. The fabric was heavy, cool to the touch. It felt like a memory I had tried to suppress. Thank you, Arthur. Give me 5 minutes. I walked into the bathroom. It was a closet, really, with a shower stall that had mildew in the grout and a mirror that was desilvered at the edges. I locked the door. I hung the bag on the hook meant for a towel. I stripped. I took off the flannel shirt that smelled of soil and sweat. I took off the canvas work pants with the grass stains on the knees. I took off the heavy boots that had walked 1,000 miles of garden paths. I piled them in the corner. They were the uniform of Barnaby the father, Barnaby the protector. But Barnaby couldn't save Liam now. Barney Joyner had to do that. I opened the bag. The suit was immaculate. It smelled of cedar and expensive wool. I put on the white dress shirt. The cotton was so fine it felt like silk against my skin. I buttoned the cuffs. I tied the silk tie in a full Windsor knot, and my fingers remembering the movements automatically after 20 years of dormancy. I pulled on the trousers, the vest, the jacket. I looked in the mirror. The man staring back was not the gardener. The softness was gone from his eyes, replaced by a predator's gaze. The stoop in his shoulders from years of bending over flower beds had vanished, replaced by the upright, predatory stance of a man who owned the room before he even entered it. I put on the watch. It was heavy gold and cold. It ticked with the heartbeat of commerce. I opened the bathroom door. Liam was standing in the middle of the room. When he saw me, he stopped breathing. He dropped the mug. It shattered on the floor, spilling cold coffee over his shoes, but he didn't even flinch. He just stared. "Dad," he whispered. I walked past him. I didn't walk like a man whose knees hurt when it rained. I walked like a man who could part the sea. I went to the table and placed my hand on the silver briefcase. Blackwood unlocked it. Inside were stacks of documents bound in blue folders. The Phoenix file. The deeds. The loan agreements. The leverage. I picked up the folder labeled St. James. I flipped it open. I scanned the numbers. Clifford was not just in debt, he was drowning. He was insolvent. He had been floating check to check, robbing Peter to pay Paul, and using my son's reputation to keep the whole house of cards from collapsing. I closed the folder with a snap. "Liam," I said, turning to him. My voice was different, deeper, lacking the soft edges of the father he knew. "Pick up the pieces of that mug. We do not leave messes behind." Liam scrambled to obey, crouching down to pick up the ceramic shards. He was shaking. "Dad, I don't understand. You look like them." I walked over to him and pulled him to his feet. I looked him in the eye. "No, son. I do not look like them. They wear suits to pretend they have power. I wear this suit because I am power. There is a difference." I brushed a speck of dust from his shoulder. "Go wash your face, put on your wedding suit. It is the only one you have that fits the occasion. We are going to the bank." "But," Liam stammered. "Oink." "Why, because," I said, glancing at Blackwood, who checked his watch. "The acquisition of First City Bank was completed at 9 a.m. this morning. I am the new majority shareholder. and I want to inspect my property. Liam went into the bathroom dazed. I heard the water running. Blackwood stepped closer, his voice low. Sir, the auditors are standing by. We have flagged the St. James accounts for immediate review. There are irregularities, significant ones. Fraud, I asked. Embezzlement, Blackwood corrected. He has been using investor funds from the Golden Tower to pay for his personal lifestyle, including the wedding. I smiled. It was not a nice smile. So he paid for the flowers with stolen money. It appears so, sir. And he used Liam's name on the architect's sign-offs to release the construction draws. If the project fails, Liam would be liable for the negligence. I felt a flash of pure, cold rage. He set him up. He didn't just want a son-in-law, he wanted a scapegoat. Blackwood nodded. Precisely, sir. Liam came out of the bathroom. He was wearing his gray suit, the one he had worn yesterday, to get married. He looked pale, but he looked determined. I am ready, he said. I looked at him. No, you are not. But you will be. We walked out of the apartment. The bodyguards formed a phalanx around us. We walked down the stairs and out onto the street. The neighbors were watching from their windows. They saw the old gardener transformed into a titan. They saw the boy from 4B being escorted like a prince. The driver opened the back door of the Rolls-Royce. The interior was cream leather and smelled of new money. I gestured for Liam to get in. He hesitated, looking at his own reflection in the black paint of the car. Dad, he said quietly. Does this mean the farm is gone? Is that life over? I stopped. I looked at the street, at the grit and the struggle. The farm is still there, Liam. The tomatoes still need watering. But for today, we have to live in this world. And in this world, we do not apologize. We do not hesitate. And we certainly do not let men like Clifford St. James breathe our air. I got in. Liam followed. The door closed, shutting out the noise of the street. The silence inside was absolute. To the tower, Blackwood, I said. The car glided away, moving through the traffic like a shark through water. I watched the city pass by through the tinted glass. I saw the buildings I had financed, the bridges I had built, the infrastructure of a life I had abandoned. Liam sat across from me, his hands gripping his knees. Dad, he asked after a long silence. How much? I looked at him. How much what? How much are you worth? I looked at the skyline. I looked at the Golden Tower rising in the distance, a gleaming needle of glass and steel that was built on lies and my money. Enough to burn it all down, son, I said softly. Enough to burn it all down and build it back up again before lunch. And that is exactly what we are going to do. The interior of the Rolls-Royce was a sealed capsule of silence gliding through the chaotic city streets. The tinted windows turned the world outside into a muted gray blur, but inside the air was crisp and smelled of expensive leather and the cold ozone scent of high-stakes commerce. I sat next to Liam, who was still adjusting the cuffs of his wedding suit, looking at the fabric as if it were a costume that didn't quite fit. Blackwood sat opposite us on the rear-facing jump seat. He didn't look at the scenery. He looked at the data streaming across the secure tablet in his hands. His face was illuminated by the blue glow of the screen, and his expression was that of a coroner examining a particularly messy corpse. The St. James portfolio is not a business empire, sir, Blackwood said, his voice devoid of any judgment. It is a crime scene. Show me, I said, extending my hand. Blackwood handed me the tablet. I swiped through the files. I had spent 30 years building legitimate wealth brick by brick. I knew what a healthy balance sheet looked like. It looked like a tree with deep roots. What I was looking at now was a mushroom, fast-growing, hollow, and rotten at the core. Clifford St. James was not rich. He was spectacularly insolvent. Look at this, Liam, I said, pointing to the screen. Liam leaned in his eyes, scanning the columns of red numbers. I don't understand, Dad. He has the villa. He has the Bentley. We just left a wedding that cost $300,000. How can he be broke? It is called the float, son. I swiped to the next page. Clifford is running a Ponzi scheme on himself. He borrows from Bank A to pay the interest on Bank B. He uses the construction loans for the Golden Tower to pay for his wife's jewelry. And look here. I tapped a specific line item dated 3 days ago. A withdrawal of $50,000 from the Golden Tower Construction Fund, labeled as materials procurement. Liam frowned. Materials for the foundation. Number for the flowers at your wedding. Liam recoiled as if I had slapped him. He paid for the roses with stolen investor money. He stole from his own project to put on a show. I said, he needed the world to think he was liquid. He needed the investors to see a successful man throwing a lavish wedding so they wouldn't ask to see the books. You weren't a groom, Liam. You were a prop in a marketing campaign. But the rabbit hole went deeper. I handed the tablet back to Blackwood. Dig into the Golden Tower permits, Arthur. Why is the project stalled? He has drawn down 40% of the loan, but the structure is only at 10% completion. Where is the bottleneck? Blackwood tapped a few keys. His fingers moved with the speed of a concert pianist. Accessing the municipal planning database now, sir. Here it is. The city halted the concrete pour 2 months ago. The soil samples came back unstable. The bedrock is deeper than they thought. The current foundation design is insufficient. It needs a redesign. A massive, expensive redesign. I looked at Liam. You are an architect's son. What happens when a foundation is rejected by the city? Liam's face hardened. You need a new structural engineer. You need a new architect of record to sign off on the new plans. Someone with a clean license. Someone with a reputation for integrity who can reassure the planning commission. And someone who is family, I added. Someone who can be pressured. Someone who can be guilted into signing a document that might not be entirely accurate because he wants to help his father-in-law. Liam went very still. The realization hit him not like a wave, but like a bullet. He stared at the partition separating us from the driver. That is why she said yes, he whispered. Brittany. She pushed for the wedding date to be moved up. She said it was because she couldn't wait to be my wife. But it was because the bank was threatening to pull the funding if they didn't get a stamped architectural drawing by the end of the quarter. He looked at me, his eyes burning with a mixture of grief and fury. They didn't want me, Dad. They wanted my stamp. They wanted my license. I was just a liability shield. It was a cruel truth, but a necessary one. Clifford hadn't just mocked my son, he had planned to destroy his professional life to save his own skin. If Liam had signed those papers when the tower inevitably cracked or sank, he would have been the one going to prison for negligence, not Clifford. Blackwood cleared his throat. Sir, regarding the lawsuit they just served, the demand for $450,000. Liam flinched. Right. The money. Dad, you said you have money, but that is $500,000. Do we just write them a check? Do we pay them to go away? I laughed. It was a dry, dark sound. Pay them, Liam. I am not going to give Clifford Street James a single penny. That lawsuit is a bluff. It is a desperate attempt to squeeze cash out of a stone because he knows he cannot make payroll next week. I turned to Blackwood. Arthur, who holds the mezzanine debt on the Golden Tower. Not the primary mortgage from First City, but the high-interest bridge loans. The dirty money. Blackwood consulted the file. A private equity firm in Chicago, and a hard money lender based here in the city. Sharkbridge Capital. I nodded. Sharkbridge. They charge 18% interest, and they break kneecaps if you are late. Clifford is swimming in dangerous waters. Here is the plan, I said, my voice dropping to a command tone. We do not pay the lawsuit. We do not defend the lawsuit. We ignore it. Because by tomorrow afternoon, Clifford Street James will not have the money to pay his lawyers to file it. I looked at Blackwood. I want you to call Sharkbridge Capital. Tell them there is a buyer for the St. James notes. Offer them full face value plus 5% if they transfer the paper to us within the hour. They will take it. They know Clifford is sinking. They will be happy to get their principal back. Blackwood nodded, a faint smile touching his lips. You want to consolidate his debt, sir? I want to own it, I corrected. I want to own every dime he owes. I want to own the mortgage on his house. I want to own the lease on his office. I want to own the debt on his credit cards. I turned back to Liam. You see, son, when you owe the bank $100, that is your problem. When you owe the bank $100 million, that is the bank's problem. But when the man who owns the bank also owns your private debt, and he happens to be the father of the boy you just humiliated, that is a catastrophe. Liam looked at me with a new kind of respect. He was seeing the mechanic look under the hood of the engine and realized just how broken it was. So we are going to foreclose, Liam asked. I shook my head. Foreclosure takes months. Courts, judges, delays. No, we are going to do something much faster. We are going to call the loans. I tapped the tablet screen on the clause marked Cross Default. Most high-risk loans have a clause, Liam. It says that if you default on one loan, you are automatically in default on all of them. Clifford missed a payment to Sharkbridge last month. He covered it up, but the record is here. I looked at Blackwood. Execute the purchase, Arthur. Buy the debt. All of it. Use the reserve funds. I want the papers in my hand before we walk into that meeting. Consider it done, sir, Blackwood said, pulling out his phone. The car slowed down. We were approaching the financial district. The Golden Tower was visible through the windshield, a half-finished skeleton of steel rising against the sky, surrounded by cranes that weren't moving because the crew hadn't been paid. It looked impressive from a distance. Up close, it was just a cage. Liam straightened his tie. He looked at his reflection in the window. He didn't look like a victim anymore. He looked like the son of Barney Joyner. Dad, he said quietly, when we get in there. Can I say something to Brittany? I looked at him. Anything you want, son. You earned it. The car stopped. The heavy door clicked open. The noise of the city rushed in, but it didn't touch us. We were armored in truth and armed with the one thing Clifford Street James didn't have. Solvency. Let's go get your dignity back, I said, stepping out onto the pavement. And let's take his empire while we are at it. At 10 o'clock in the morning, the automatic glass doors of First City Bank slid open to admit Clifford and Patricia St. James. They did not walk in, they marched in. They moved with the aggressive entitlement of people who believed that the laws of physics and finance suspended themselves in their presence. Clifford was wearing a suit that cost $5,000, but it was pulled tight across his chest, a fabric dam holding back a reservoir of panic. Patricia walked a half step behind him, clutching a Birkin bag that was undoubtedly charged to a credit card that was currently over its limit. She looked around the lobby at the people waiting in the teller line with a sneer of undisguised revulsion, as if poverty were an airborne virus she might catch if she breathed too deeply. They did not take a number. They did not wait in line. They walked straight past the velvet ropes and the security guard, who looked too tired to argue with a man who looked like he yelled at waiters for sport. Clifford approached the reception desk and slammed his hand down on the marble counter. The sound echoed through the quiet bank, causing a young mother in the corner to flinch. "Tell Henderson I am here," Clifford barked at the young receptionist. "And tell him I do not have all day. I have a lunch meeting with the mayor and I need this paperwork signed before I leave." The receptionist looked up, her eyes wide. "Sir, do you have an appointment?" Mr. Henderson is in a meeting with Clifford, leaned over the counter, his face flushing a dangerous shade of crimson. I am Clifford Street James. I am this bank's largest commercial client. I built the skyline you see out that window. When I walk into this building, Mr. Henderson is available. Now pick up that phone before I have you fired and blacklisted from every bank in the state. The receptionist's hand trembled as she reached for the receiver. She whispered into it, her eyes darting between Clifford's furious face and Patricia, who was busy examining her fingernails as if the scene were utterly boring. A moment later, the heavy oak door at the back of the lobby opened. Mr. Henderson stepped out. He was a man of average height, with thinning hair and spectacles, but today there was something different about him. Usually he greeted Clifford with a nervous smile and a sweaty handshake. Usually he was the kind of banker who bent over backwards to accommodate the whims of the St. James Empire. Today he stood straight. His hands were clasped behind his back. His face was a mask of absolute neutrality. Mr. St. James. Mrs. St. James Henderson said, his voice calm and level. Please come in. Clifford huffed, adjusting his tie. About time, Henderson. I was about to call the regional manager and have your desk moved to the basement. They followed Henderson into his office. It was a corner suite with a view of the financial district. Directly in the center of the view stood the skeleton of the Golden Tower, the unfinished monument to Clifford's ego. Clifford sat down without being asked, taking the large leather chair and spreading his legs. Patricia sat next to him, placing her bag on the desk as if it were a centerpiece. Let's make this quick, Clifford said, waving a hand dismissively. I need the extension on the $50 million construction loan. The city inspectors are dragging their feet on the foundation permits, so we are behind schedule. I need a 6-month rollover on the principal, and I need you to release the next tranche of $5 million for operating expenses. Just have the papers ready, and I will sign. He held out his hand, expecting a pen. He expected Henderson to shuffle some papers, apologize for the delay, and give him the money. That was how it always worked. He bullied, they folded. Henderson did not offer a pen. He sat behind his desk, his fingers interlaced. He looked at Clifford with the dispassionate gaze of a mortician measuring a coffin. I am afraid that is not possible, Mr. St. James, Henderson said. Clifford blinked. He let out a short, sharp laugh. What do you mean it is not possible? Stop playing games, Henderson. I know you have the authority. We have done this 3 times already. Just roll the loan over. I will even invite you to the gala opening. How is that? There will be no rollover, Henderson said. And there will be no release of funds. The loan is matured. Clifford, it is due. In full. Today. The silence that filled the room was heavy and cold. Patricia stopped looking at her nails. She looked at Henderson, then at her husband. Clifford's face went from red to a pale, mottled gray. Excuse me, he whispered. You are in default, Henderson stated. You have missed 3 interest payments. You have violated the covenants of the loan by falsifying your liquidity ratios. And we have discovered that you used construction funds for personal expenses, including a lavish wedding that apparently ended in disaster yesterday. Clifford slammed his fist onto the desk, making Patricia's bag jump. That is a lie. That is a clerical error. I will fire my accountant. And don't you dare talk to me about default. I am the Golden Tower. If you pull the plug on me, you lose $50 million. You need me, Henderson. The bank cannot afford to write off a loss that big. That was Clifford's trump card. He owed so much money that he thought he owned the bank. He thought he was too big to fail. Henderson didn't flinch. He opened a folder on his desk. He pulled out a single sheet of paper. Under normal circumstances, you might be right, Clifford. The bank would be hesitant to foreclose on such a large project. We would probably try to work something out to avoid the embarrassment. Clifford leaned back, a smug smile returning to his lips. Exactly. So let's stop this nonsense and... However, Henderson interrupted, his voice cutting like a razor. These are not normal circumstances. First City Bank was acquired this morning. We have new ownership, and the new ownership has a very different philosophy regarding toxic assets. Clifford frowned. Acquired. By who? It doesn't matter. My terms are locked in. Your terms included a clause for immediate repayment upon change of control if the borrower is in default, Henderson said. And the new owners have instructed me to exercise that clause. They do not want to negotiate, Clifford. They do not want to restructure. They want you out. Patricia spoke up for the first time, her voice shrill and indignant. This is outrageous. Do you know who we are? We are the St. James family. We do not get evicted. We do not get foreclosed on. Who are these new owners? I will call them right now and have this cleared up. They probably don't realize who they are dealing with. Henderson looked at Patricia. He looked at her with the mixture of pity and professional detachment. Oh, I assure you, Mrs. St. James, they know exactly who they are dealing with. They have conducted a forensic audit of your entire life. They know about the second mortgage on the villa. They know about the lease on the Bentley. They know about the shell companies you used to hide your losses. Clifford stood up, knocking his chair back. It hit the wall with a crash. Enough, I am done listening to this little bureaucrat. I am taking my business elsewhere. I will refinance with Chase. I will refinance with anyone, and when I do, I will buy this bank just to fire you. You cannot refinance, Clifford, Henderson said quietly, because nobody will touch you. Your credit rating was downgraded to junk status an hour ago. The news of the wedding fiasco has spooked the market. Everyone knows you are insolvent. Clifford began to shake. It was a tremor that started in his hands and spread to his shoulders. He looked like a building whose structural supports had just been kicked out. You can't do this, he stammered. I have rights. I have a legacy. You have debt, Henderson corrected, and that debt has been sold. Sold? Clifford asked, his voice barely a squeak. Yes. First City Bank no longer holds your note. We sold the entire St. James portfolio at 9:30 this morning. Every mortgage, every loan, every credit card. It is all gone. It belongs to a private investment firm now. Clifford looked around the room as if searching for an exit, as if looking for a way to wake up from this nightmare. Who, he demanded? Who would buy $50 million of distressed debt? Who wants to destroy me this badly? Henderson reached into his breast pocket. He pulled out a small rectangular card. It was heavy cream-colored cardstock with embossed navy blue lettering. He placed it on the desk and slid it across the polished wood until it rested right in front of Clifford. The new creditor has requested immediate liquidation of all collateral, Henderson said. They want the keys to the Tower, Clifford. They want the keys to the villa. They want the keys to the cars. By noon. Clifford looked down at the card. He stared at it. His eyes tried to focus on the elegant script, but his brain refused to process the information. It was impossible. It was a hallucination. He read the name out loud, his voice trembling with a mix of confusion and dawning horror. Blackwood and Joyner. He looked up at Henderson. Joyner like the gardener. That piece of trash, Liam's father, Henderson, allowed himself a small, cold smile. Mr. Barnaby Joyner is not a gardener. Clifford, he is the chairman of the private equity firm that just bought this bank. He is a billionaire, and he specifically requested that I give you this card when you started screaming. Patricia let out a sound that was half gasp, half scream. A billionaire. That old man in the dirty truck. That is impossible. He is a nobody. He is the man who owns your life now, Henderson said, standing up. And he is waiting for you. Where? Clifford roared, slamming his hands on the desk. Where is he? I will kill him. I will strangle him with his own suspenders. This is fraud. He tricked us. He is at the Joyner Tower, Henderson replied calmly, checking his watch. In the boardroom. He said he would give you one chance to negotiate a surrender before he sends the sheriff to evict you. If I were you, Clifford, I would run. He does not like to be kept waiting. And he mentioned something about the traffic being terrible for people who don't own helicopters. Clifford stared at the card. Blackwood and Joyner. The name burned into his retinas. The realization crashed over him like a tidal wave. The man he had mocked, the man he had silenced, the man he had called trash, was the only thing standing between him and total ruin. He grabbed Patricia's arm, pulling her out of the chair. "Come on," he hissed. "Where are we going?" Patricia wailed, stumbling in her heels. "We are going to beg," Clifford said, dragging her toward the door. "We are going to crawl, and we are going to beg." He threw the door open and stormed out into the lobby, leaving the card on the desk. But the name followed him. It echoed in his mind. Joyner. 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 The gardener who grew money. The peasant who was actually the king. And Clifford St. James, the man who thought he was a giant, suddenly felt very, very small. The view from the 45th floor of the Joyner Tower was not just a view, it was a statement. From the floor-to-ceiling reinforced glass windows, I could see the entire city spread out like a circuit board. I saw the bridges that carried the commerce, the highways that pumped the blood of the economy, and in the distance the stalled skeleton of the Golden Tower, a rusting monument to Clifford St. James's hubris. It looked small from up here. Everything looked small from up here. I sat in the chairman's chair, a massive construct of black leather and chrome designed to intimidate. My back was to the heavy mahogany doors. I was facing the window, watching a storm front roll in over the harbor. The sky was turning a bruised purple, matching the suit I knew Clifford would be wearing. Liam stood to my right. He was leaning against the glass, looking down. He wore the gray suit he had been married in, but he wore it differently now. Yesterday, it had been the uniform of a man trying to fit into a world that despised him. Today, it was the armor of a man who had just conquered that world. He checked his watch, a Patek Philippe I had gifted him, from the safe in the apartment. "They are late, Dad," Liam said, his voice calm. "They are not late," I replied without turning around. "They are hesitating. They are in the elevator right now, realizing that the air gets thinner the higher you go. They are realizing that they are not coming to negotiate. They are coming to surrender." The intercom on the massive desk buzzed. It was a discreet, expensive sound. "Sir," the receptionist said, "Mr. St. James and his party are here. They are demanding immediate entry. They are quite agitated." "Send them in," I said. "And Arthur, ensure the door is closed behind them." I heard the click of the lock. Then a moment of silence. Then the double doors were thrown open with a violence that made the heavy wood shudder against the stops. Clifford St. James stormed into the room. He was sweating. His tie was loosened, a frantic slash of silk against a shirt that was damp at the collar. Patricia followed him, her heels clicking sharply on the hardwood floor like the tapping of angry claws. Brittany brought up the rear. She was still wearing the white dress from the day before, but it was stained with wine and wrinkled from a night of panic. She wore dark sunglasses indoors, a futile attempt to hide the wreckage of her face. They stopped. They looked at the vast empty boardroom. They looked at the long black table that could seat 30 people. And then they looked at the end of the room, where a high-backed leather chair faced the window, obscuring the person sitting in it. They saw Liam standing by the window. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Clifford took 3 heavy steps forward, his face contorted with rage. "You! What the hell are you doing here? Did you follow us? Did you break in?" Patricia shrieked, clutching her purse to her chest, as if Liam were about to snatch it. "Security! Where is security? This is stalking. We are here to meet the chairman of Joyner Holdings." "Not my daughter's loser ex-fiancé," Brittany took off her sunglasses. Her eyes were swollen, but they narrowed with venom when she saw Liam. Liam, get out. Get out right now. My father is here to save his company. We do not have time for your little pity party. Go back to your studio apartment and rot. Liam did not move. He did not flinch. He simply looked at them with a mixture of pity and boredom. He took a sip of water from a crystal glass on the side table. Clifford slammed his briefcase onto the boardroom table. It slid across the polished surface, leaving a long, ugly scratch before coming to rest near my chair. I demand to see the owner. Clifford roared at the back of my chair, assuming I was some anonymous billionaire who had made a mistake letting the riffraff in. Listen to me, sir, whoever you are. You have made a terrible error in judgment, allowing these two trespassers into a private meeting security. Patricia marched forward, her finger pointing accusingly at Liam. How dare you? How dare you show your face after ruining my daughter's wedding? And where is your father? Is he hiding under the table? Did you bring the old gardener to beg for money? She looked around the room, her eyes scanning the corners with disdain. Security? She screamed again, her voice cracking. Why is nobody coming? Why is this trash allowed to breathe the same air as us? She turned her fury toward the back of my chair. Mr. Chairman, are you listening? You need to fire your receptionist. You have allowed a gardener and his unemployed son to infiltrate your office. This is unacceptable. We are the St. James family. We do not share space with the help. I waited. I let the silence stretch. I let their words hang in the air, creating a permanent record of their character. I let them dig the hole so deep they would never see the sun again. Then I slowly, very slowly, spun the chair around. The mechanism was silent. I turned until I was facing them directly. I rested my elbows on the armrests and steepled my fingers. I looked at Patricia. I looked at Clifford. I looked at Brittany. The blood drained from their faces in unison. It was like watching a tide go out. Clifford's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Patricia's hand froze in midair, her pointing finger trembling. Brittany dropped her sunglasses. They clattered onto the floor. Hello, Clifford, I said, my voice low and resonant, filling the cavernous room. Hello, Patricia. I looked down at the floor where Patricia was standing. I believe you are standing on my $20,000 Persian rug, Patricia. It is an antique from the 17th century. Please take your shoes off. Your heels are damaging the fibers. Patricia looked down at her feet. She looked back at me. She blinked rapidly, her brain struggling to process the visual information. You, she whispered. The gardener. I stood up. I buttoned my Tom Ford jacket. I walked around the desk. I did not walk with the shuffle of an old man. I walked with the stride of a titan. I am not a gardener, Patricia, I said, stopping 5 feet from them. I am Barnaby Joyner. I am the chairman of Joyner Holdings. I am the man who bought your bank this morning. And I am the man who currently owns the mortgage on the house you slept in last night. Clifford staggered back. He grabbed the edge of the table to steady himself. No. No, that is impossible. You drive a truck. You wear flannel. You are nobody. I am the nobody who just bought your debt, Clifford, I replied coldly. I am the nobody who watched you mock my son, and I am the nobody who is about to evict you from your life. Brittany stepped forward, her hands shaking. Liam, tell me this isn't true. Tell me this is a joke. Your dad, he fixes toilets. He plants petunias. He can't be a billionaire. Liam looked at her. He looked at the woman he had loved, the woman who had laughed while her father cut my microphone. He is not just a billionaire, Brittany, Liam said, his voice steady. He is the man who taught me that integrity is worth more than money. A lesson you apparently missed. Clifford found his voice. It was a desperate, strangled thing. This is fraud. You tricked us. You misrepresented yourself. I will sue you. I will have this acquisition annulled. You can't just pretend to be poor and then ambush us, I laughed. It was a dark sound that echoed off the glass walls. Misrepresented myself. Clifford, I never told you I was poor. You assumed it. You looked at my clothes, you looked at my car, and you decided I was beneath you. You decided I was trash. You treated me based on what you thought I was worth. I took a step closer to him. If I had walked into your wedding wearing this suit, if I had pulled up in my Rolls Royce, would you have cut my microphone? Would you have mocked me? Clifford stared at me, unable to answer. No, I answered for him. You would have licked my boots. You would have seated me at the head table. You would have bragged to everyone that you knew Barney Joyner. You didn't hate me because I was a gardener, Clifford. You hated me because you thought I was weak. And that is why you are dangerous. That is why you are finished. Patricia began to cry. It wasn't a dignified cry. It was the wail of a woman watching her social status evaporate. Please, she sobbed. Please, Mr. Joyner. We didn't know. We were stressed. The wedding was so expensive. We are good people. We are a good family. You can't do this to us. Good people, I asked. Good people do not mock their guests. Good people do not marry for architectural stamps. Good people do not steal from their investors to pay for flowers. I walked over to the table and picked up the red folder that Blackwood had prepared. I threw it down in front of Clifford. That is the audit of the Golden Tower project, Clifford. My forensic accountants have been through your books since 9 a.m. You are not just broke. You are a criminal. You have been moving money between shell companies to hide your losses. You have been paying yourself a salary of $2 million a year while your contractors go unpaid. Clifford went gray. That is creative accounting. Everyone does it. Not in my bank they don't, I snapped. I leaned over the table, getting right in his face. I am calling the loans Clifford. All of them. The construction loan, the mortgage on the villa, the lease on the cars, the credit cards. I want it all. Clifford fell into a chair. He looked small. He looked deflated. But I can't pay. You know I can't pay. If you call the loans, I am bankrupt. I will lose everything. That is the point. I said, straightening up. Brittany ran to Liam. She grabbed his lapels, her eyes wild. Liam, please, you can't let him do this. We are married, or we were going to be. I love you. I didn't mean to laugh. I was nervous. Please tell him to stop. We can fix this. We can sign the papers. I will be a good wife. Liam looked down at her hands on his suit. He carefully peeled her fingers off, one by one. You don't want a husband. Brittany, he said softly. You want a shield. You want someone to hide behind when the world comes for you. He stepped back, standing next to me. My father is not doing this to you, Liam said. You did this to yourselves. You built your life on a foundation of lies, and now the ground is shaking. Patricia looked up, her mascara running down her face in black streaks. What do you want? She hissed. What do you want from us? I looked at the three of them. The family that had thought they were royalty, now reduced to beggars in my boardroom. I want you to leave, I said. I want you to walk out of this building. I want you to go to your villa and pack your things. You have 24 hours to vacate. After that, the locks will be changed. You can't kick us out of our home, Clifford shouted, finding one last reserve of arrogance. It takes months to evict someone. I have rights. I signaled to Blackwood, who was standing by the door. Mr. St. James signed a deed in lieu of foreclosure 3 months ago to secure his bridge loan from Sharkbridge Capital. Blackwood, said his voice devoid of emotion. He signed away his rights to a judicial eviction in exchange for a lower interest rate. We own that paper now. We can remove you immediately. Clifford put his head in his hands. He knew it was true. He had signed everything away in his desperation to keep the charade going. Now I said, pointing to the door, "Get out. Before I call security and have you removed as trespassers." And Clifford. He looked up, then his eyes dead. "If you ever come near my son again, if you ever try to blacklist him or slander him, I will spend the rest of my life and every cent of my fortune making sure you never work again. I will make you radioactive." "Do you understand?" Clifford nodded slowly. He understood power. He respected only power, and for the first time he realized he had none. They stood up, shaking, broken, defeated. They walked toward the door. They didn't march this time. They shuffled. "Wait!" I called out just as they reached the threshold. They turned, hopeful for a reprieve. "Patricia," I said, pointing to the floor. "You forgot your shoes." Patricia looked down at her bare feet, then at the pair of expensive heels lying on my Persian rug. She scurried back, grabbed them, and ran out of the room barefoot. The heavy doors closed. The silence returned. I looked at Liam. He let out a long breath he had been holding for 2 days, that he said was intense. I walked back to the window and looked out at the city. The storm had broken. Rain was washing the streets clean. "It is done, son," I said. "The past is dead." Liam walked over and stood next to me. He looked at the skyline. "Dad." "Yes." "Can we keep the rug?" I laughed. It was a real laugh, loud and free. "We can keep the rug, Liam, and we can keep the bank, and we can keep the tower. But most importantly, we keep our dignity." I put my arm around his shoulders. "Now how about that burger I believe I promised you lunch?" Liam smiled. The truck I patted my pocket where the keys to the Ford jingled against the keys to the Rolls-Royce. Always the truck, son. It keeps us honest. We walked out of the boardroom, leaving the millions and the power behind us for a moment, stepping back into the world, not as billionaires, but as a father and son who had weathered the storm and come out the other side stronger than steel. The St. James family would be a footnote in the gossip columns by morning, but the lesson they learned would last a lifetime. Never mock the man who holds the hose. He might just own the water company. The silence in the boardroom was absolute. It was the kind of silence that happens after a bomb goes off, before the ringing in your ears starts. Patricia was standing barefoot on my Persian rug, clutching her expensive heels like weapons. Clifford was gripping the edge of the mahogany table, his knuckles white, his face a map of ruin. Brittany was staring at Liam as if seeing him for the first time, not as the man she married, but as the winning lottery ticket she had just set on fire. I reached out and picked up the thick, leather-bound file Blackwood had placed on the desk. It landed on the polished wood with a heavy final thud. I slid it across the table toward Clifford. It stopped inches from his shaking hands. "Read it, Clifford," I said, my voice low and steady. "Or don't. It doesn't matter. The ink is already dry." Clifford stared at the folder. He didn't open it. He looked up at me, his eyes pleading for a mercy he had never shown anyone in his life. "Barnaby, please. We can work this out. I have equity. The tower is worth $200 million once it is finished." I leaned back in my chair. "The tower is worth nothing, Clifford, because you don't own it." I pointed a finger at the file. Item 1. As of 9:30 this morning, my forensic accountants completed their audit of your personal and business finances. They found $20 million in unsecured liabilities hidden in offshore shell companies. That is bank fraud, Clifford. Federal bank fraud. Clifford flinched as if I had struck him. "Because of that fraud," I continued, "I have invoked the acceleration clause on every single loan you have with First City Bank. The mortgage on your villa in the Hamptons. The lease on your private jet. Even the loan on that ridiculous Bentley you parked in my loading zone. It is all called due immediately. Since you cannot pay, I have seized the assets. Patricia let out a strangled cry. My house? You can't take my house that has been in my family for 3 years, I corrected her. Since Clifford bought it with a loan he never intended to pay back. My security team is currently at the property changing the locks. You have 24 hours to remove your personal effects. Anything left after that will be auctioned to pay your creditors. Clifford slumped into a chair. He looked small, defeated. But I wasn't finished. I looked at Liam. He was watching them, his face impassive. He needed to see this. He needed to see the monster dissected. Item 2, I said, flipping open the file to a marked page. That lawsuit you served my son with this morning. The one demanding $450,000 for the wedding and emotional distress. I looked at Brittany. She lowered her eyes, unable to meet my gaze. That lawsuit has been dismissed with prejudice. Do you know why, Clifford? He didn't answer. He was staring at the table. Because you cannot sue for damages when you used stolen money to pay for the event. I said, my voice hardening. We traced the funds. $50,000 for flowers taken from the concrete budget. $30,000 for catering taken from the electrical budget. You embezzled construction loans to throw a party, Clifford. That makes the entire event a crime scene, not a wedding. Brittany gasped. Daddy, you said the business was doing great. You said we could afford it. He lied to you, darling, I said calmly. Just like he lied to the bank. Just like he lied to my son. I closed the file. But those are just details. Those are just money. You can always make more money, right, Clifford? You can always start another scam. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the steel skeleton of the Golden Tower in the distance. But you can't build a skyscraper without land. I turned back to them. Item 3. The fatal blow. You thought you owned the land the Golden Tower sits on, I said. You thought you had a 99-year lease with the city. But you didn't read the fine print, did you, Clifford? You were too busy picking out Italian marble for the lobby. Clifford looked up, his eyes confusing. The lease is solid. I have the papers. You have a sublease, I corrected. The city doesn't own that land, Clifford. Joyner Holdings owns that land. We bought it 20 years ago when it was a toxic waste dump. We cleaned it up. We leased it to the city for $1 a year with one specific condition. I walked over to him and leaned down, my hands on the table. The condition was that any development on that land must be fully funded and managed by a developer with a credit rating of A or higher. If the developer defaults or commits fraud, the lease reverts to the landowner immediately. I smiled, a cold, shark-like smile. You committed fraud, Clifford. You defaulted. The lease is void. The land belongs to me. And as the owner of the land, I am exercising my right to evict you from the premises. Clifford's face went gray. No. No, you can't. The building, the steel, it is trespassing, I said. You built a $50 million pile of junk on my front lawn. I am going to tear it down and turn it into a community park. A park named after my wife. The silence that followed was the sound of an empire collapsing. Clifford St. James was not just broke. He was erased. His project, his home, his car, his reputation, everything was gone, vaporized by the stroke of a pen from the man he had called trash. And then the movement started. Not from Clifford or Patricia, but from Brittany. She had been standing there, frozen, watching her inheritance evaporate. But as the reality set in, she turned her head. She looked at her father, broken in the chair. She looked at her mother, barefoot and sobbing. And then she looked at Liam. She looked at Liam standing next to the billionaire chairman of Joyner Holdings. She looked at the man who was now the sole heir to an empire that could buy and sell her family 1,000 times over. And the calculation in her eyes was the ugliest thing I had ever seen. She threw herself at him. It wasn't a walk, it was a desperate lunge. She dropped to her knees in front of him, her white dress pooling on the floor amidst the wreckage of her family's dignity. She grabbed his hands, clutching them to her chest. "Liam," she wailed, tears streaming down her face, ruining her perfect makeup. "Liam, baby, please listen to me. I didn't know. I swear, I didn't know." Liam looked down at her. He didn't pull away immediately. He just looked at her with a profound solemnness. "Brittany," he started. She cut him off, speaking fast, desperate to close the deal. "It was them." She pointed a shaking finger at her parents. "They forced me. They made me treat your father that way. They threatened to cut me off if I didn't marry you for the architectural stamp, and I was a victim, Liam. I was scared." She squeezed his hands tighter, her nails digging into his skin. "But I love you. You know I love you. The last 2 years, they were real. We can fix this. We can run away from them. Your dad can help us. We can start over, baby. Just you and me." I watched my son. This was the final test. The siren song of the woman he had loved, offering him everything he had thought he wanted. A wife, a future, reconciliation. All he had to do was believe the lie one last time. Liam gently disengaged his hands from hers. He stepped back, creating a distance that felt like miles. "Get up, Brittany," he said softly. She looked up at him, hope flaring in her eyes. You forgive me, get up," he repeated, his voice firmer. "You are ruining the dress." She scrambled to her feet, wiping her eyes, trying to compose herself into the beautiful bride she had been yesterday. "Liam, I knew you would understand. We are soulmates." Liam shook his head. "No, Brittany. We are not soulmates. We were a business transaction. I just didn't know I was the product." He looked her in the eye. "You say you love me, but yesterday when your father cut my dad's mic, you laughed. When he called him trash, you smirked. You didn't look at me with love then, Brittany. You looked at me with embarrassment." "But I was stressed," she protested. "No," Liam said. "You were honest. For the first time in our relationship, you showed me exactly who you are. You don't love me. You love the idea of an architect who could sign your father's permits. And now," he glanced at me and then back to her, "now you love the idea of being a billionaire's daughter-in-law. You are doing the math right now, Brittany. I can see it in your eyes. You are calculating how many Birkin bags my father's money can buy." Brittany's face hardened. The mask slipped. "That is not fair. I am your wife." "Technically, we are married," Liam laughed. It was a short, sharp sound. "Technically, we never signed the license. I left it on the table when I walked out." "We are nothing, Brittany." He turned to me. "Dad, I am done. I think we should have them removed." Brittany's face twisted. The beauty vanished, replaced by a snarl of pure entitlement. "You can't do this. You are a nobody. You're just a boring architect with a rich daddy." "You are lucky I even looked at you." Liam smiled. "And there it is. The real Brittany." He leaned in close to her. "You are right. I am just an architect. But my father, he is the man who just evicted you. And frankly, Brittany, you don't deserve the Joyner name. You don't even deserve the mud on his boots." He turned his back on her. He walked over to the window and stood next to me. I looked at Blackwood. "Arthur, please escort the St. James family out of the building. Their access badges have been revoked. And make sure they don't take the pens. They are property of Joyner Holdings." Blackwood opened the door and signaled to the security team waiting in the hall. Clifford stood up shakily. He looked like he had aged 20 years in 20 minutes. He looked at me. "What happens now?" he whispered. "Now," I said. "Now you learn to live like the rest of us, Clifford. You get a job. You pay rent. You take the bus. I paused. And if you are lucky, maybe you will find out that a burger tastes better when you earned the money to buy it. Security escorted them out. The screaming started as soon as they hit the hallway. Patricia yelling about her shoes. Brittany yelling about her life, Clifford yelling about his lawyers. Then the elevator doors closed, and there was silence. Liam let out a long breath. He slumped against the window frame. "It is over," he said. I put a hand on his shoulder. "No, son. It is just beginning." I looked out at the city. The storm clouds were breaking. Sunlight was hitting the steel of the Golden Tower. We have a lot of work to do. That tower isn't going to tear itself down, and we need to design a park. Liam looked at me. A park, yes. The Joyner Community Park. I think it needs a garden, a big one, with vegetables, and maybe a plaque that says, "Honesty grows here." Liam smiled. "Can I design the gazebo?" I laughed. "Only if you promise not to use stolen flowers." We stood there, father and son, watching the city. We had won. Not because we had the money, but because we had the truth. And in the end, that is the only currency that never devalues. The elevator doors slid shut, cutting off the sounds of the St. James family's destruction. The screaming did not stop immediately. I could hear the muffled echoes of Patricia demanding to speak to a manager and Clifford threatening lawsuits that he could no longer afford to file. But eventually, the silence returned to the 45th floor. It was a clean, heavy silence, the kind that settles after a storm has stripped the dead wood from the trees. I walked over to the desk and pressed the intercom. "Arthur, initiate the asset recovery protocols. I want the locks on the villa changed by sunset. Send a team to secure the Bentley and the private jet, and contact the district attorney's office. Send them the forensic audit of the Golden Tower. They will want to see the evidence of the wire fraud before Clifford tries to leave the country." "Consider it done, sir," Blackwood replied, his voice calm and efficient. I turned to Liam. He was sitting at the massive boardroom table staring at his hands. He looked like a man who had just walked through a hurricane and was surprised to find himself still standing. He looked up at me. His eyes were tired but clear. "They are really gone, aren't they, Dad?" "They are gone, son. By tomorrow morning, Clifford Street James will be a cautionary tale in the business section of the newspaper. By next week, he will be indicted. He built his life on debt and deceit. We just pulled the plug." Liam nodded slowly. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city skyline where the steel skeleton of the Golden Tower stood like a tombstone. "It is strange," he said. "I thought I would feel happy. I thought watching them lose everything would feel like a victory. But mostly, I just feel relieved, like I can finally breathe again. That is what freedom feels like, Liam. It isn't a parade. It is just the absence of weight." I walked over to stand beside him. The city lights were beginning to flicker on below us, a sea of electricity and ambition. I looked at my reflection in the glass. I saw the expensive suit, the gold watch, the power. But underneath it all, I still felt like the man who planted tomatoes and fixed fences. "Liam," I said, turning to him. "This company, Joyner Holdings, it owns half this city. It has assets in 3 continents. I built it from nothing, but I built it alone." I paused, letting the weight of the moment settle between us. "I am 68 years old, son. I am tired of fighting sharks. I want to go back to my garden. I want to spend my days worrying about aphids, not auditors." I gestured to the empty chair at the head of the table. "It is yours, Liam. All of it. The bank, the real estate, the investments. I am stepping down. I want you to take over as chairman. You have the integrity this city needs. You can turn the Golden Tower into something real. You can run this empire." Liam looked at the chair. It was a throne of leather and chrome. It represented more power and money than he had ever imagined. He looked at it for a long time. Then he looked at me, and he smiled. It was the smile of the boy who used to help me fix the truck engine on Sunday afternoons. "No, Dad." I blinked, surprised. No, Liam repeated firmly. "I don't want it." He walked over to the chair and ran his hand along the backrest. "If I take this chair now, I am just another rich kid inheriting his daddy's empire. I would be no better than what Brittany thought I was. I would be skipping the work. And you taught me that the work is the only thing that matters." He turned to face me, his hands in his pockets. "I am an architect, Dad. I want to build things. I don't want to manage hedge funds. I want to design houses that families can afford. I want to fix that mess of a tower and turn it into a community center, not because I own the bank, but because I drew the plans." He took a step closer, his expression serious. "I want to start my own firm, Joiner Architects. But I don't want a handout. I want a loan, a business loan, market interest rate. I will pay you back every cent with interest. I want to start from zero, Dad, just like you did." I looked at him. My heart swelled until I thought it might burst. I had spent 20 years hiding my wealth, fearing that money would ruin him, fearing that he would become soft, entitled, or weak. But standing there in his cheap wedding suit, turning down a billion-dollar empire to build his own legacy, I realized I had nothing to worry about. The mud on his boots had done its job. I reached out and shook his hand. It was a firm, strong grip. "Deal," I said. "But on one condition." "What is that?" "You let me be your first client. I need a new barn at the farm. The roof is leaking." Liam laughed. "You got it. But I am charging you full price for the design." We left the tower together. We took the elevator down to the lobby, past the security guards, who nodded with respect, past the marble floors and the gold fixtures. We walked out onto the street, into the cool night air. The Rolls-Royce was waiting at the curb, Blackwood standing by the open door. I walked past it. "Dad," Liam asked. "Where are you going?" I walked over to the 1998 Ford F-150 parked illegally in the loading zone. It was covered in dust and looked like a relic from another time. I patted the hood. "I am going home, son. The tomatoes need watering, and I think I left the stove on." Liam smiled and climbed into the passenger seat. The leather was cracked and the cabin smelled of old coffee and gasoline. It smelled like home. As we drove out of the city, leaving the skyscrapers and the sharks behind us, I looked in the rearview mirror. I saw the lights of the Golden Tower fading into the distance. I saw the empire I had built, and the empire I had just destroyed. But then I looked at my son sitting next to me. He was sketching on a napkin, his face illuminated by the dashboard lights, dreaming of the future he was going to build with his own 2 hands. I had spent a lifetime accumulating wealth. I had billions in the bank. I had power, influence, and fear. But in that moment, driving a 20-year-old truck with a bad transmission, I knew I was the richest man in the world. I once hid my wealth to protect my son from the greedy. I hid it because I was afraid the world would eat him alive. But today I used my wealth to teach him the most important lesson of all. The value of a man does not lie in his wallet. It does not lie in his suits or his cars or the buildings that bear his name. The value of a man lies in how he stands up to protect his family when his wallet is empty. And my son, he stands tall. I spent 20 years fearing that wealth would corrupt my son, hiding my empire behind a facade of mud and old flannel. But today proved that character cannot be bought, nor can it be stolen. Clifford St. James believed power came from intimidation and expensive suits, but he built his castle on a foundation of debt and deceit. True power is not loud. It does not need to demand respect. It commands it through integrity. My son chose the poor gardener over the rich tyrant, proving that while money can build towers, only truth can build a legacy that lasts. If you believe that integrity is worth more than a bank account, Hit that like button and subscribe for more stories, where the underdog bites back, and let me know in the comments. Would you have forgiven Brittany, or did Liam make the right call?